I like to begin any conversation about cybersecurity with my students by looking at the historical context. How did we get here? One of my favorite tools is this table that describes the attributes of the agriculture age, the industrial age, and the information age. And many of us have actually experienced all three in our growing up. If you can imagine yourself back in the 1700s, the heart of the agricultural age, and imagine how landowners lived in those days, you can visualize what your day was like, what your interrelationships were like, your interactions with people, how your work was organized, who you spoke to, who you worked with. Essentially, you were very tied to the land, and you were tied to the seasons, and you were tied to the sun. So you woke up with the sun, you went to bed with the sun. With the industrial age, we introduced a lot of artificial constructs into our existence. So the factory whistle was what really guided people's days. You ended up with 9-to-5 jobs or 8-to-4 jobs, and people tended to work where the capital equipment was concentrated. So you had machinery develop, you had the steam engine, and these eventually ended up accumulating people and tools and resources, and we saw the birth of corporations, and we saw the birth of mega corporations that hire thousands of people that are organized in a hierarchy, that are organized in silos around topics. So you have the human resource department, you have the engineering department, you have the legal department, and all of these are nicely siloed in a bureaucracy, and they tend to make us specialists. So our jobs become very proscribed in really a narrow specialty, unlike what farmers experienced in the agricultural age, where they were basically dependent on themselves and had to take care of the entire production process of their farms. With the industrial age, we specialized. Now, moving into the information age, which is the transition that many of you have experienced in the last couple of decades. The information age brought in a whole new reality, and now we're no longer tied to the desk, tied to a building, tied to our organization in the same way. We're interconnected, and many of us commute and participate virtually in work. And I know from my own experience that I have friends and colleagues I'm working with from around the world that I feel closer to through our virtual connections than I do to people that are just down the hall from me in the next cubicle. We also have seen some incredible dynamic shifts in technology, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute. But we also have seen evolve an interdisciplinary approach to work. We've seen a lot of learning that's occurring online, and we see that networks are at the heart of the technology that's driving the information age. But let's look at how our computer systems have evolved and how networks have evolved. When we began with our information system revolution, we were concentrated around mainframes. In the 60s through the 80s, our mainframes were the way we got information, but they were always behind perimeters, physical perimeters. They were behind cipher-locked doors. Lists were kept of who could get in and who couldn't. And so we had cameras that were focused on the door. It was very much a physical security mechanism that governed the information security of our mainframe systems. So physical security and cybersecurity were in many ways pretty much the same thing. In the mid-'80s, we began to see desktops proliferate on people's desks. We no longer had to rely totally on mainframes. We did, however, create sneakernet, where we would walk our disks down the hall and share them with someone else. That became inconvenient, by the way, but the only real risk to information was losing a disk, or in the case of an employee that worked for me, he took his disk home. They were magnetized. He put it on his refrigerator with a magnet, and then the next day when he brought it to work, all the information was erased. But those were the kinds of information security problems we had in the 80s. But we began to wire up our systems because it was awkward to rely on SneakerNet, and we certainly saw the convenience of being able to pass files along a wire. And what happened in that transition, in my opinion, was a lack of imagination of how we were upending information security and introducing vulnerabilities. In one way to look at the network systems that we produced, every desktop computer, every wire in the system, every node, every edge presented a possible vulnerability. You could have somebody that would wait until you left to go down the hall, get in behind you, and log right into your system and have access to your files. You could have somebody interrupt a signal on a wire and download information that's being transmitted. But most of us still stayed in our mainframe imagination and thought about physical security when we thought about cybersecurity. And so what has been unleashed by networking all of our systems is the incredible cybersecurity problem that we're facing today. And a lot of it had to do with society and us as individuals having a difficult time keeping up with these changes and understanding the implications. Most of us are very law-abiding citizens, and we don't think inside out like somebody that might take advantage of a system. But this took time to evolve. We're going to get into this in later sections of this particular course. So what we've essentially done is we've smashed industrial age infrastructure. We have violated the silos, the chains of command and communication, by having ubiquitous information flowing through a system. This also opens up certain vulnerabilities in ways that information can leak out and get into the hands of people that in the old days would never have had access to it. We also have created unintended consequences, this whole cybersecurity problem. My favorite metaphor is construction work where there are surprises. If you've ever done any repairs on your home, you know you go in with all good intentions to replace something like a sink or a deck, and you get started by destroying what was there before and replacing it. When you destroy things, there's always surprises. And so we have our Sorcerer's Apprentice. If you recall that video where the magician's apprentice grabs the wizard's magic wand and has fun with it and tries to shorten his chores for the day, but really doesn't know how to control what he's released. And that's precisely what we find ourselves in right now, a situation where we have unleashed incredible capability and opportunity and potential through our digital systems, but at the same time, a lot of unintended consequences because we're now moving into this thing called cyberspace, where the way we do business, the way we think, the way we interface with reality has been totally changed. We'll be talking about that